What happens when Paul goes to Athens? That's what we're going to talk about today in Acts 17. I think Acts 17 is one of my favorite chapters of all of Acts. I think it speaks to me who I was before I became a Christian and who I probably would have been had I been a Jew at that particular period of time. Now, let's just talk about it. He was imprisoned in Philippi. He met Lydia. Lydia opened up her home. She was probably wealthy because she was someone who dyed purple, which was a royal color. And the jailer who became afraid when Paul was released that he would be, essentially put to death. But he became a Christian. He asked, how could I become a Christian? So this is building our anticipation and what's going to happen next in Corinth. Now, the story of this is really interesting because we are seeing a very young church, and each of the churches has different needs, different strengths and abilities. And so we're going to learn a little bit more about it. Hi, this is Jill from the Northwoods, talking about the Bible one small step at a time. So what's happening now is we are on our way to Thessalonica. Now, that's where we're going to start out. Now, Paul is trying to go back and visit many of the places he once was. He's trying to uh, encourage them, grow them. He is trying to make a church that understands what it is. I just got done watching a couple months ago this movie called Paul, Apostle of Christ, and there's this end scene where Paul dies at the end. I'm going to spoiler alert it. He goes to heaven and he greets all the people he killed when he was a Pharisee. And the moment got to me. That's God's grace right there on full display. And I kept trying to figure out, I watched this movie because I was trying to figure out, what kind of person is Paul? I once did a 100-mile hike over 8 days in England, and it darn near broke me. This man is traveling hundreds of miles on foot. He's driven, he's smart, he's adaptable, he listens for God's word. So that's really what's amazing. Paul and Silas travel according what is the Egnatian Way, which is reaching the capital of Thessalonica. This is the capital of Macedonia. Amphipolis is about 30 miles southwest of Philippi, and the province of Macedonia was divided into 3 administrative areas. Amphipolis was the capital of the first district, but the apostles and their co-workers passed through that area. Apollonia was another one that's 30 miles southwest of Amphipolis. And 35 miles farther to the west was Thessalonica, the capital city of Macedonia. And here the Lord's message is going to go out to the Macedonians and the Greeks. The Thessalonians would become a role model for all believers in Macedonia and in Greece and even beyond. This is going to be a very key thing. Now, it said some of the Jews believed, and many devout Greeks were, becoming devout. Quite a few women joined them, but others, they're not happy. Some of the Jews that were there got jealous, not necessarily of Paul himself, but the idea of salvation being brought to everyone. We talked a little bit about that the last time. What is it in you when you have a gift and you're mad when someone else gets that free gift? I mean, it's something else, right? And so they start stirring up the mob and they attack the house of Jason, which is where Paul and Silas are staying. Jason is someone who's a big deal in this town, and he's leading this church, and they're dragged before the city officials. Hey, they're turning the world upside down. They're preaching a different king. They're, all the same things we heard about Jesus. And you know what? They're talking about a king, but not a king of this world. And they're not talking about violence or politics, but they're talking about truth, a higher truth. And if you want to know the truth of it is that the Greeks got eaten by the Roman Empire and Christianity ate the Roman Empire in return. So Jason is forced to pay a security bond, and then the believers send Paul and Silas away to Berea by night. They're a growing church and things are going okay. And they got this, right? They have a good, strong leader in Jason. So in Berea, things start off a little bit better. Paul goes to the synagogue, and the Jews there they described it as more noble than the ones in Thessalonica because they listened and they investigated. I mean, can't you just see like someone like Paul coming and you know that he was once a Pharisee who was in the leadership in Jerusalem, which would have meant something to the synagogue there. And then, going through and looking at page by page. Oh, you're right, Paul. It does say that on this, in this chapter on this verse. I mean, I'm sure they didn't have chapter and verse, but they would look it up. They were listening. They were doing what Jesus kept saying to the Pharisees and the Sadducees in Jerusalem. Hear what I'm saying. See what I mean. Let it go into your heart. And they were. So they were examining it, and that's really great. And I think that's exactly what all of us should be doing is lining up the words of God and testing them out, rolling them around. That's what we're trying to do here. So many believed, and a few Greek women of high standings too. That's a double negative, including, again, not a few Greek women, but many Greek women. Many Greek women are believing too. But here trouble comes again. And the Jews from Thessalonica hear Paul is in Berea, and they go over there to stir up trouble. The believers send Paul off, but Silas and Timothy stay behind, to help that church go. And Paul heads towards Athens, waiting for the others to join him. Now, waiting in Athens, Paul is stirred deeply. It says, spirit provoked him. The city is full of idols. That's Athens, right? Athens is still filled with idols, but that was the idea. Athens was the headquarter of thought for the Greek Empire. And it was an imperial city. It conquered territories. And just like all of them did, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, as soon as they conquered an area, they brought in more gods. They adopted those gods. And it's wild because you kept getting more and more gods. Like I said, I was watching this sort of history of Rome, and one guy said, "Oh, did your shoes break again? Did you pray to the shoe god?" So they just kept accumulating more and more gods. So he speaks again, first to the synagogue and then to the marketplace. The marketplace is going to be agora, I think is the Greek word, but that where everyone is a hub of ideas and all those types of things. But Athens in general is a hub of philosophies, ideas, thinkers that you heard about some of them. Stoics, grit, logic, control, being in charge of your destiny. The Epicureans that were seeking peace and avoiding pain, seeking pleasure and avoiding not pleasure. And they are hearing Paul and are curious. He seems to be talking about some foreign gods, Jesus and this resurrection. So they invite him to the Areopagus, which is known as Mars Hill. Mars Hill exists today. And so if you think about what the Areopagus was, it was kind of the TED Talk of that era. It wasn't really so much a religious place anymore. Religion, as much as there were all these gods, religion was dying out during this period. People were becoming what we would call agnostic or atheist. They were into philosophy and ideas. And these were people, it said, that were people who lived in town and foreigners who just sat around all day long hoping to hear some new idea, just like I like to do, where I, watch things on YouTube and listen to new ideas, except I'm not looking for new religious ideas, but, something fresh. They just wanted something fresh. And they're curious people. And you see that, right? You've met people like that who want one new philosophy after another. So Paul's really masterful here. And this is why a lot of people felt like he was a Hellenized Jew, but he was certainly well educated, not just in Jewish matters, but in world knowledge. They're not that far apart that you wouldn't know when you were in Jerusalem what's going on in Greece. Or when you're in Turkey, Asia Minor, you wouldn't know what was going on in Rome. It's a small world. The Mediterranean ideas got around. So he knows that these people are not going to know anything about Jewish texts. So he says, I see you're all very religious. I found, all these altars around, right? But I found an altar to an unknown God. And let me tell you who he is. Now, first, let's talk about exactly where this unknown God came to. What I read was they would let animals, I think lambs, run through the city. And if it ran to the statue of Athena, they would slaughter the lamb right there and tribute it to Athena. But then if the lamb started, someplace where there was no statue or no altar there, they put the unknown god. We don't know who this lamb was to be slaughtered for, but here's an unknown god. So he decides to take advantage of this. And he says, you know what? I'm going to tell you who he is. I'm going to tell you who he is right now. So Paul stands in the middle of this and he's bringing them in based on what is going on in their town. He talks to them like he talks to them. And he says, this unknown God that in your ignorance, you don't know who it is. I'm going to tell you who it is. It's God who made the world and everything in it, Lord of heaven and earth. And these shrines are made by hands. They don't serve human hands. They don't do anything, and they don't give anything to anyone. But the God, he gives life and breath to all things. And from all of this, one man was made so that he could live over the whole earth, and at the appointed time comes to live. So that he did this so that they may seek God, that they may reach out to him, they may know who he is. And we're the offspring of this God. And so he says, and since we are God's offspring, God's children, the Jewish people, we shouldn't think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone, all these things that you're making. It's art. It's human art. And it's your imaginations. And you have overlooked the times that God commands all people everywhere to repent. He set a day where he's going to judge the world, all the world, not just Jerusalem, but everybody. And the righteousness of man, righteousness is to follow what God has said, to this man that he has appointed, Jesus. It's going to be proof. And then everyone is going to be raised from the dead. And when they heard about this resurrection, they did not believe in the resurrection of the body at this point. Some people believed in a soul, that maybe your soul was eternal and would go out and be present, but not a body. And so they said, some of them, well, we'd like to hear more about this. And other people were like, no, this is silly. No one's resurrected. So essentially, some people came and believed and some people walked away, and they had their worldviews directly challenged. But to get invited to Mars Hill and speak to this group of people, I mean, that's amazing. And that Paul can stand there and stand on his own and do this. And there were some people who did believe. One was named Dionysius. That's going to be named after the god who's like wine and all sorts of bad things. And the interesting thing about this is that this is kind of special about who they were. Like I said, if you were sort of making this up, you wouldn't put names in it, because now I could go to the Areopagus and go find Dionysius and ask him, hey, what just happened here? His title suggests that he was a member of this Areopagus council. So the TED Talk Council, he was, prestigious. He was governing over this court in Athens. He was probably an intellectual, part of the ruling class. And for someone to believe in Paul's message, that's important. Later Christian tradition even made him into a saint, and some confused him with what was called a pseudo-Dionysius, who was a later mystical writer, not this guy. And then Damaris is much less known about her. The name is Greek. Most of the names, when they end in S, are Greek. And she was a woman at the Areopagus. There probably were very few women there, so that must mean that she was educated. She had some social standings. She understood enough to listen to speeches at these TED Talks. And later on, some traditions, not biblical, describe her as Dionysius' wife. But, obviously we don't know, things to find out in heaven. But it's important because Luke names people when their faith is noteworthy, either because of their standing in the community or their connection to someone he talked to, or he had contact with them. They spread the gospel. And in Athens, where most mock Paul, even mentioning two individuals of high standing reacting to the gospel, these two potentially elite people, that's pretty exciting. And so when you explain that, that's, I think, why you get that idea. Luke likes to name people of significance, either because he talked to them or because they did something amazing. So this is not a huge revival, but seeds are being planted in a place where it is really rocky and full of thorns, if you go back to Jesus' parable. What I'm going to meditate on this week is about how Paul didn't have a script. He doesn't have this same speech. He walks into every town. He studies his audience. He thinks about, probably when he was walking around Athens, what am I going to say to these people? He understands people, where they're coming from, and he finds a bridge to walk people across to Jesus. He makes the way straight by reaching out to them where they're at. And that's really what I want. I'm going to meditate on that. Not a cookie cutter speech, not memorized lines, but to understand where someone's at, what they believe, what they hope for. And I think we can all think too, how do we all speak when someone asks us about Jesus? Do we stick to a script? Do we water down our message because we're afraid? He didn't do either of those things. He adapted the starting point. Always comes to the same point, but he starts out differently. God is not far from anyone. He can be found by anyone who genuinely seeks him. So sit with that idea a little bit. I'm going to sit with that idea too, that the God of the universe is within reach of all of us, even those who never read the Bible. And what I'm going to pray about is to make me sensitive like Paul, that I can understand the people around me. I understand their stories, their cultures, that I don't assume any sort of one size fits all when it comes to talking to people. There is one truth, but the way you can talk to people is in a way that each of them can understand. It's not just the way I feel most familiar, but what makes them feel most familiar. And I hope that I get that kind of wisdom. I hope to resist any kind of temptation to be rehearsed, but instead let the Spirit guide me moment by moment so that my words aren't canned, but fresh, and being able to respond to whatever questions, that idea that wherever God sends me, wherever he wants me to be, wherever he wants me to speak, I want him to speak through me. And what I'm going to share with others is to be like Paul, be bold, speak wisely, and whether you're a lifetime churchgoer or someone who's never opened up a Bible, the gospel is for everyone. And you can share it to a way that makes sense to the listener. You're not changing the truth. You're talking in a way that a person can understand. I'm kind of a different sort of person, that I always thought in my head that if someone was going to convert me, they were going to be someone at the Areopagus. They're going to convince me with logic and, the philosophies of the world. And that's not what happened. Instead, I heard a message of the heart, which kind of surprised me more than anything else. So think about that a little bit, that we all react in a different way, and it might not be how you expect. It might not be how that person expects either. God is not far from us. And if people are rejecting what we say to them, they are sometimes not just rejecting God. Maybe they're not rejecting God, but maybe they're rejecting how it's been put to them in the past. Maybe it's been put to them in a harsh way or in a cruel way or in a stark way. And you might be the one who can help them see clearly by speaking from a place of love and clarity and compassion. All right, everyone, thanks so much. I appreciate you listening and watching this. If you have anything to say to me, you can email me at jill@startwithsmallsteps.com. Remember, I have other podcasts. Buzz, Blossom, and Squeak is about nature and the world around us. And Start with Small Steps is about how we can improve our lives one small step at a time. It's not a religious podcast. I'm not shying away from it, but it's more like making checklists and goals and that kind of thing. I appreciate you being there. Thanks so much and have a great day.